Can we get another warm welcome? I'm so happy to be here, the Major General Jackson. So as Grant mentioned, my name is Michael Joseph. Yes, we do look alike, very similar. I work with Dade County Federal Credit Union. It is a mouthful, but I could tell you we've been serving the community since 1939. So whether you're a resident or a small business owner, chances are you may know us. Show of hands members, people familiar. Beautiful, beautiful, happy members. Lots of our team is here. I highly recommend that before you step out today, introduce yourself. Show of hands team, real quick, show of hands. Our CEO is here as well. If you have any questions, we're here to support you.
All right, well, hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Hey, so I'm going to try not to fall off the stage. I tend to wander, so if I fall, you got to catch me. All right. Hey, so I know the host. I kind of went around the whole veterans thing, and as I was standing over there taking pictures this morning, which I felt like I was back at my wedding again. But thanks for bringing that back. 33 years later. But everybody kept coming up and saying, "Hey, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service." And I appreciate the sentiment. And we took some time to recognize our veterans too, but I want to cue on a couple things before I get to my two cards. All right, so first off, we've talked about Chief back there, but all of our first responders, all right, they are the ones you need to thank for your service, all right. As I told Chief, hey Ralph, yeah, that's Ralph Rivas. Anybody know Ralph? No. Nobody knows Ralph here in southern Miami. Ralph, it's good to see you again, man. It's good to see you. That's right. But so I was telling Chief when he came through the line, a few years back, every time I go to a different duty station, one of the things I do is I link up with the local police and I do a ride along, right? It's a chance to kind of see where my soldiers live at. And I got to tell you, one, the Army doesn't necessarily buy real estate in the best places in the United States, but everywhere I go, when I do these ride-alongs, I am amazed at what our first responders do, all right? I've got multiple tours to Afghanistan and Baghdad. I've been shot at, I've been blown up, whatever. But I have never been as concerned as when I did ride-alongs, all right? Never. I mean, I travel in vehicles, 4-vehicle convoys. My dudes are loaded to the gun, to the teeth with guns and everything. I can take care of myself. Our first responders travel by themselves or with a wingman and do our bidding and take care of you. So my hat's off to every one of them. I respect them every single day, and that's what we need to do. Hey, and the last one before I get to my remarks, and I apologize. A couple other folks that came through the line. So any parents of service members? Yeah, I know there's a couple. Raise your hand. All right, thank you. And if you didn't raise your hand, thank you, all right? As I told them as they came through the line, I had the honor of working with some of the best people in America. Our service members on any service, right? But it starts at home. And so, we pull in great quality kids. And first off, thank you for loaning your children to us, all right? I hope they have a great experience. But, we can't survive. We can't do our job if our kids don't have values, right? And that starts at home. So thank you, Mom and Dad, for loaning your children. And then lastly, any kids of veterans? Yeah. All right. People read my bio all the time, and they're like, oh, this, that, and the other. And I say, hey, what I'm most proud about is the last line of my bio. It says, one, I'm married to the love of my life, my wife, Valerie, for 33 years. But two, I have 2 great kids. Amazing kids, right? And if you ever met an Army brat or a Navy brat or whoever, they are absolutely amazing. So if you are a son or a daughter of a veteran and you've lived the military life, thank you. You sacrifice as much as we do. So thank you again. Hey, so moving on to SouthCom. All right, so I'm going to talk about a couple things. So as a chief, I always joke, my boss gets to travel all throughout the Western Hemisphere, gets to meet everybody, right? The chief of staff, you don't see it, but there's an ankle bracelet on right now that that automatically goes off if I leave the 305 area code. Because as a chief, my job is to keep the trains running. So I'm going to talk a little bit about SouthCom, a little bit in-house business, because I think this is a community event, so it's important to know SouthCom internal. But then I'm also going to talk a little bit external, what my boss would tell you if she were here about what's going on in the Western Hemisphere. So let's talk about SouthCom first off. Hey, so we just celebrated our 25th anniversary here in Miami. That's pretty cool. First 14 years of it, we lived in the newspaper factory next door to where we're at now, right? We built this beautiful headquarters facility, moved in there just over 10 years ago, and it's great. 18-acre compound, beautiful child development center, great gym, right? Phenomenal facilities. I'll just tell you, everybody who comes to visit us from the rest of DOD is amazed at the quality of facilities we have here in Miami. So appreciate everything the community did to bring us here and get us the resources required. You may have noticed a little bit of construction on 33rd Street. No. Anybody seen that? That is amazing. All right? Now, like all good things, it took forever to get here. But thanks to all your all's efforts, and I do mean all your all's efforts, because every bit of this community reception of this leadership body had something to do with it. You got it here. We got the funding, we got the momentum, and it's going like gangbusters. We broke ground on it last January, right? And they started cranking on it this summer. So it's going to be great. We think summer of 26, we'll get our first service members in there. It's going to be 146 separate living units, all right? About 46 of them will be what we basically call dual service member homes, right? We'll put the junior enlisted soldiers to live in there because, as you mentioned earlier, $2,000 gets you a closet in Doral. So the youngest kids who are at the most vulnerable, if you will, financially, we've got spaces for them right across the street. We'll have single-family homes so that folks don't necessarily have to live in Pembroke Pines and Miramar and the places up north or down south. They can live right across the street. And that's going to be great for them. But I'll tell you what else is great. It's permanence, right? It's hard to say from our side that we're part of the community if we don't live there, right? And having 170 families living right across the street in Doral in homes that look like they belong in Doral is a sign of permanence and it's a sign of community. So we're super stoked about it. Like I said, summer of 26, we'll be moving people in across the street. We should be done by summer of 27. So that's a great thing. All right, so let's talk stuff outside of Miami, all right? So let me ask you all a question, because you just don't hear me blabber the entire time. If we're talking about the Western Hemisphere, south of Mexico, what do we think the national security problem is south of Mexico? Shout it out. What? Drugs. What'd you say? Chinese. Say it again, sir. Chinese. You guys are like much smarter than any other military audience I get, all right? I play this game with them, I go, word association. I go, SouthCom. Give me a word, and they'll go, drugs. I go, SouthCom, and they'll go, guns. And I go, SouthCom, and they'll go, thugs. Right? And what they don't say is China. What they don't say is Russia. What they don't say is Iran. All right? What they don't say is counterfeiting goods that are weakening the economies of our partners down in South America. That is the national security problem in South America right now. All right? So, I went back, when I put this pitch together a while back, I looked at my notebook. And one day, one page of my notebook, I took the notes, for that particular intel brief. All right? And this is what I had in my notebook. All right? We have two failed states off the coast of Florida, 90 miles away. Cuba and Haiti. Two failed states. That's not good. As I say it, we're one bad day away from a mass migration event, which means thousands of people taking to the seas and heading our way. Humongous humanitarian crisis. Put aside the whole migration thing. 1,000 people coming across the water, all right, in things that they call boats, which nobody here would call a boat, all right, is a humanitarian crisis. It's a disaster waiting to happen. That's one bad day away. It could be an earthquake, it could be a hurricane, it could just be civil unrest, right? There's lots of triggering events, but we watch it very carefully because that, again, would be a traumatic event for everybody. We got PRC, we got Chinese intelligence facilities operating what the Chinese would call in the Pacific as their first island chain, right? They talk about Taiwan as the first island chain, right? And then their second island chain. They get pretty upset about stuff that happens in the first island chain, all right? But China is operating in our first island chain, Cuba. Okay? Okay, you mentioned drugs, all right? Let's talk about drugs. All right? In any given 24-hour, 48-hour period, on average, we're pulling about 2 tons of cocaine off the water. 2 tons, 4,000 pounds. All right? Just in the last 48 hours, we pulled 5 tons of marijuana out of the water. All right? Now, that's kind of a new thing, by the way, marijuana coming out of South America in large numbers. Usually it comes out of Mexico. Now it's starting to come out of South America. Now you're like, damn, 2 tons. All right, fun fact. We only interdict about 10% of what we see. So do the math. I try not to do math in public, so I won't tell you what that number turns out to be. All right? But 2 tons is what we're pulling out. Where's the other 90% going? All right? It is still a big problem, and we'll talk some more about drugs here in a second. The Russians, all right? The damn Russians, right? Yes, the Russians are focused on Ukraine. That's a good thing. It's a good thing for us in the Western Hemisphere. It's a bad thing, obviously. Don't let me make light of that. All right? But the Russians are still a player in this area, and we'll talk about them a little bit. We've got Russian Navy ships coming down through the Caribbean from time to time. A few years back, before Ukraine, we used to see Russian bombers that would take off from Russia, and they would basically fly all the way down through the Atlantic, through the South Atlantic, back up through Africa, and back to Russia. Why? Because they could. Why did they want to do it? It's to show the Americans that they could do it. All right? And they are still doing it, just to a lesser frequency. Okay? Regretfully, we've got a democracy problem a little bit. Right? We've got certain countries in our area that are kind of sliding back away from democracy. That's bad. All right? We need to keep an eye on that. We got the Chinese growing. So to the gentleman's point over here, right? Our national defense strategy says China is our pacing challenge. All right? It is what we are building our defense structure against, is China. All right? Obviously, people think China is, well, it's focused solely in the Indo-Pacific region. Wrong. All right? And I'll talk more in depth on China here in a second. They are in the Southern Hemisphere. They are deeply engaged in the Southern Hemisphere, and they have a purpose. Okay? Migration. All right? Everybody's concerned about what's happening at the southwest border. It starts, obviously, in South America. All right? We watch it very closely. SouthCom is not responsible for the southwest border. We're not responsible for the Rio Grande River. All right? What we are is responsible for everything south of Mexico. All right? Over 2.4 million encounters at the southwest border. Half of them start south of Mexico. All right? We'll talk a little bit about Venezuela, where most of these migrants are coming from. All right? We got this little area called the Darien. Everybody know where the Darien's at besides Ralph? Thank you, ma'am. All right, the Darien is this little neck of land between Colombia and Panama. It's the worst jungle I've ever seen. All right? I went to jungle school in Panama, absolutely hated it. All right? The Darien is worse than where we're at in Fort Sherman in jungle school. Very mountainous, inhospitable. It rains a lot, super high humidity. All right? It is a humanitarian crisis. 1,000 people a day right now are making their way through the Darien on foot. They're being told it's a 2-day trek. It'll be fine. It's a trail. 2 days, you'll be on the other side. 5 to 7 days later, they are coming out broken, extorted, vandalized, robbed, pick your verb, all right? Being exploited by the cartels as they work their way through the jungle, all right? Families have no idea what they're getting into. You got the Russians. Again, I'll go back to the Russians. Putting their finger in the democratic process through misinformation, largely in the electronic sphere, using cyber and media, right? Trying to poke fun or kind of degrade the democratic processes in our countries and our partners, so we're watching that closely. And lastly, I mentioned Iran. Iran is a player in the Western Hemisphere, all right? They're associated with countries like Venezuela, right, where they are pushing arms deals and selling them property and equipment, military property. And obviously, the larger Hamas problem also exists here as well. So China, let's talk a little bit more in depth about it. So what is China doing? All right, China is setting the long game. As my boss would say, it's not about military confrontation in the Southern Hemisphere. All right, it's about China setting conditions for future opportunities. All right, China thinks globally. All right, and they realize that just like they do in Africa, the Southern Hemisphere is critical to success in the Indo-Pacific region. All right? So they are setting the conditions, largely through economic means. If you look, who knows what the Belt and Road Initiative is, the BRI? Belt and Road Initiative is a great, for them, is a powerful, great economic lever. All right? Favorable loan terms, huge infrastructure investment, right, on very, very favorable conditions, all for the sake of, hey, we will build you a bridge. We will build you a dam. We will build you facilities. As long as you turn your back on Taiwan, all right? As long as you sign these other agreements, whether it be mutual defense agreements or cooperative trade agreements or what have you, right? And with that comes the hooks, right? Those are the hooks. And then it's impossible for countries to maneuver, okay? If you look at Taiwan, for instance, of the 13 countries in the world that recognize Taiwan, seven of them are in the Western Hemisphere, all right? Now, most of those 7 are little island countries in the Lesser Antilles, all right? They have worked over the larger countries like Brazil and Colombia and Chile and Peru, all right? They have worked them over and got them to sign on to the BRI. Because they're members of BRI, they have got huge infrastructure projects going on inside their countries, all right? But countries like Honduras, for instance, just recently switched last summer. They used to recognize Taiwan, all right? The leadership of Honduras traveled to China. Meetings ensued. They came back signatories of the BRI. They also came back with 15 associated trade agreements from China, and they also removed their recognition of Taiwan in the same stroke. All right? BRI effectively isolates Taiwan diplomatically as countries flip their, not allegiance, but flip their recognition, to PRC and away from Taiwan. All right? So what are we doing about it? All right? We're exposing them. We're exposing their malicious behaviors. Now, granted, China's not necessarily playing militarily in the Western Hemisphere. We don't see formations of Chinese soldiers running all over the place. We don't see Chinese engaging in exercises like we do, right? U.S. SouthCom and the Department of Defense are actively engaged with our partners. We train alongside them. We exercise alongside of them, all right? We have equipment that's interoperable. That's a good thing. So military to military, we're solid, all right? But the Chinese game is not military focused. It's economics and it's diplomatic. And so, damn, I totally lost my thought. So what are we doing about it? We're exposing those concerns. So we're saying, hey, look, do you really want to buy a Chinese 5G network? I know it's cheap. It's got the best price around. It's like $3.99, okay? Do you want to pay? Do you want that? Well, it sounds great, but let me tell you what happens. Your data is no longer your data, all right? Your data now goes back to China. Do you want that? Let me educate you. How about safe cities? One of China's big efforts is these things called safe cities. Now, who wouldn't want a safe city? Chief, who wouldn't want a safe city? Right? Everybody wants a safe city. But here's the cost of it. A safe city means that every street corner's got a camera on it, and the data that camera takes in goes back to China. Okay? So face recognition, pattern of life, all that stuff goes back to China. Okay? Nobody wants that. So, again, the price may be great, but the impacts, the cost is high. All right? How about, anybody know where, let me give you a story outside the Western Hemisphere. Anybody ever heard of the African Union? Right? So it's an international cooperative agreement inside Africa, right? China built the African Union a free headquarters. Beautiful facility in Kenya, right? Cost, totally free. All right? It came with a beautiful network inside of it. All the routers and switches and plugs and all that kind of stuff. All right? After they built this building, the African Union moved into it. And guess what they found out? Every single bit and byte of traffic that went across that network inside that building was automatically sent back to China. That's the cost of working alongside China. All right? So, as I said, our job is to expose that. We educate our partners. We tell them, here's the cost. I know it may cost more to go with a Western-oriented company, like Nokia or Ericsson or AT&T. It may cost more. But in the end, 1, you're getting a better product, and 2, you're maintaining your liberty. Let's talk about Russia. So I mentioned earlier about Russia's efforts to degrade the democratic process, right? So, Russia lives right now, their biggest tool they have is what I would call the softer military skills or the softer military capacities. The information operations, cyber, all right? They have a huge media apparatus in South America, all right? Larger than CNN. All right? And they use that to trumpet, messages that work against the democratic process. Recently in Ecuador, the invasion of Ukraine was bad in South America. It did not play well with the cultural sentiments of South America, right? The whole international liberties and things like that. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, a lot of the countries in South America just turned their back on Russia. And if you think back to the days of the 60s, 70s, and 80s in the Cold War, a lot of our partners in South America bought Soviet-era equipment. artillery and armor personnel carriers and weapons and so those kinds of things. The impacts of Ukraine is I'll say it's provided an opportunity to kind of work our partners off of those Soviet-era equipment and buying American, honestly. Buying U.S. equipment. That's a good thing for everybody. One, it's good for partnerships, right? So as we're all working off the same sheet and the same equipment, right? But it also weans them off that Russian reliance. And so that was a good thing. So we've been working this with Ecuador for a while. And if you saw in the news just a couple of days ago, the Russians said, well, because of a potential food, a potential virus scare, we're no longer buying Ecuadorian bananas, right? Seriously. Ecuador's main export are bananas. Russia imports a lot of bananas. And so Russia said, we're not buying any more Ecuadorian bananas. Why? Because the Ecuadorians were getting rid of their Russian equipment. And so, again, they play this out in the news and saying, hey, look, the Russian news agency came out not too long ago, literally the day after that, and said, here's the decision, we're not buying the bananas anymore for this, that, and the other. And then that promulgated like wildfire, right? And we're in the process of kind of putting that back in the box a little bit. Drugs and guns and thugs, all right? What in SouthCom, we call them TCOs, trans-criminal organizations. So the days of Pablo Escobar are over, right? Now, what do I mean by that? Pablo Escobar was focused on cocaine, right? He made his money off cocaine. I'm going to tell you that currently cartel business is about $305 billion a year. That's how much money they make every year. Only about a third of it's on cocaine. $100 billion, $130 billion in cocaine revenues each year for the cartels coming out of South America. What's the other $200 billion? It's counterfeiting, it's logging, it's mining, it's human trafficking, it's banking, money laundering, all right? They have diversified. The cartels are no longer the old cartels. They're actual industrial complexes, all right? Now, if you add, I said $300 billion, here's a little fun fact too. If you add up the defense budgets for all the countries in South America, to include Mexico, all right, it's $55 billion, okay? The cartels are outspending the defense industry in South America 5 to 1, okay? So that's why we have to be their partner, all right? They just can't, there's just no financial way they can keep up. But again, I think the key point to remember is it's not just about drugs, all right? It's about a larger connected industry that also ties back to China. And so if you look at whether or not it's the actual government of the People's Republic of China or if it's just Chinese criminals or whatever, they are closely connected and it's all one network, right? How drugs are produced, sold in the United States, produces cash, all right? We've gotten pretty good at following the money, all right? So now you plug into the Chinese banking industry, you launder that money through the Chinese banking industry and through Chinese industry, and it comes back down in South America. It's all interconnected there. All right, cool. And then lastly, I'm gonna wrap up with this. So my boss's main talking point nowadays is this thing called, we call it economic security is national security, all right? And so if you take all those challenges I gave you and you say, hey, look, what can we do about it, all right? Well, it starts with this. And it's this idea that economic security is national security. South America has been beaten down in the last few years, right? Between COVID and some other internal events, I mean, their economies are struggling. Argentina's inflation is triple digits, right? President Milei is trying to tackle that with a new approach and wish him the best, right? Yeah, he's taking it by the horns, literally. But they got to fix the economy, right? By fixing the economy, we solve the underlying problems which come back to us. So my words, not my boss's words, but if you're mad about immigration, if you're mad about migration, all right, it comes back to the local economies. If you fix the local economies, people will not be so intent on moving. All right, we talk about migration, we talk about pull factors and push factors. Push factors is, hey, I don't have a job. I don't have a social safety net. All right, I don't have health care. All right, inflation's too high. All right, those are the push factors. That's what makes people leave in the first place. All right, if you solve those problems or you reduce those problems, people may stay. All right. A lot of immigrants here are just coming to the United States, not necessarily coming as families, but they're coming as workers, and they're sending money back down to their families back home. Why? Because they don't have jobs back home. So it's about the economy, all right? If you're angry about drugs, right, and you should be, right, you can trace it back to economy, right? Why do people grow coca? It's a great cash product, right? What's the alternatives? There's lots of layers to that problem, but again, it starts with the economy. If we can address and increase the economic output of our partners, we will solve some of our national security problems. If you're angry about China, and you should be, it starts with the economy. It starts with the economic factors of our partner nations. Again, you attack that problem, you reduce the Chinese threat in our Western Hemisphere. All right. So again, economic security is national security. And I would ask you, if you remember one thing from me today is, hey, the United States national security is tied to our partner nations' economic outlook. And so what can you do? You increase investment. You change policy to make loans more favorable, right? You lobby. You assist, all right? You argue for U.S. industry in our regions, right? And so when it's the oil expansion off the coast of Guyana and bringing in U.S. Companies and resources to bear there, or other things, or infrastructure projects, right? Again, it's about the U.S. being engaged. Okay, so that is the main takeaway. So with that,
let's give a round of applause.